Okay, here we are with another episode of the Teenage Super Sleuths, and they've been talking a lot about this quantum physics, and so I asked them to give me a lecture on what they mean by quantum physics, and they said in order to understand that, you need to use a program called Modtran.
Modtran.
Okay, Backflip, you're familiar. You said you part of your PhD work was done with Modtran?
Yep.
Okay, and so what you're telling me is this is what we're going to do is we're going to go look at the infrared light in the atmosphere. Is that what this is all about? And you said this is a very interesting tool that you need to, once again, you need to use in your science class to truly understand this issue. Yeah. Right? And so when you go to Modtran, and what this is climatemodels.universityofchicago.edu/Modtran/.
Again, a reliable source.
A very reliable. This is you were telling me NASA and the Air Force uses this program?
Yes, NASA, this is actually another program NASA uses.
All right.
NASA put the first man on the moon.
Yeah,
so
and that's
useful. They use it.
But you were telling me they seem to have gone downhill recently. They're no longer putting men on the moon. They're sitting there promoting this global warming hoax. Right?
Hoax.
So now they're becoming hoaxes.
You would think if they were really concerned, they'd be trying to get people
they would be
to another
debunking this.
space.
They would be debunking this myth and putting people on Mars. Okay,
They'd
so
be running.
let's get back here. And so once again, this is where you put in your model inputs. And so you have CO2, and you say that the ppm means part per million?
Yeah, parts per million.
And this is methane, and you're saying that people are all upset about methane because that's cows passing gas?
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of ridiculous. Then you got ozone. And then you've got water vapor, and then you've got freon. And you're saying the water vapor is the most significant one here because you were telling me that that's the most significant greenhouse gas?
Yes.
That's absolutely crazy.
Water vapor is.
I never heard that before, but I'll trust you. Everyone I talk to says CO2 is the most significant greenhouse gas.
No.
Nonsense. And you said you can prove that?
Yes, we can prove that.
Okay. All right. Well, then down here you have the locality, and right now we're to the tropical atmosphere, and there's a whole bunch of different atmospheres you can choose.
So.
Okay. And then here, this is the one that you said is real interesting.
Yes,
is you
the
get to
clouds
choose
and rain.
the clouds and things like that here. Okay. And then you have the altitude looking down, and this is looking down from that altitude. And you're saying that if you're looking down from 70 kilometers, the upward heat flux, and I don't even know what that means, is around 300 watts per meter squared?
Yeah, it's around 300.
That's absolutely crazy. But you're telling me that's not how you want to use this thing.
That's not how we want to use this.
Because what we're concerned about is warming the surface, right? And so what we're concerned about is looking up to see what's coming back to the Earth.
So
and we're going to adjust
go
that.
ahead and change that to looking up from looking down.
Well, let me just cover this real quick from what you were telling me. This is what the atmosphere looks like from above. And as you can see, let's just change this to wavelength. Okay, as you can see, this is the area that CO2 absorbs, and that's between 13 and 18 microns. So you can see the CO2 does kind of cause a dip here, and that's the CO2 being absorbed by the atmosphere. And you can tell, you told me you can test that by changing the CO2 to 0.
Yes.
And when you watch what happens when you do that. See how that glip disappeared?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you're saying that is what CO2 does. But you're saying, let's go ahead and test this thing. But we're going to go back to the beginning of the industrial age, you said?
Yes.
And you rattled off some number like 280 parts per million is what the CO2 level was at the start of the industrial age?
280 parts per million.
I mean, it just sounds like you know that so well. It's like you say that in your sleep. So you put 280 parts per million. Okay, and that's what it looks like. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to look down. We're going to look up, and we're going to change this to 0.01 kilometers because that's where all the temperature gauges are, right? That's where all the temperature gauges are. And so this is the impact of what's going on. So if we're looking up, okay, we're looking up, okay, what we're getting here is a downward heat flux of around 368.008. So you said this is your baseline or your constant?
Yeah, that's our constant.
This is what you're going to say. We're going to start, and then we're going to change things to measure the impact, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so you said the way you do that is you say, save this run to the background.
So this will show us.
Oh, but wait, you wanted to do something first to show the quantum physics, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So what you wanted to do first was show that this was zero CO2, all right? And we're going to save this to the background, right? And then we're going to change this to 280, okay? And we're going to run it to the background. And so what you just told me was that as you went from 0 to 280 parts per million, you added the back downward radiation is 7.22 watts per meter squared in the lower tenth of a kilometer of the atmosphere. That's what CO2 is contributing in the lower atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so 7.22 is the change over 288 parts per million. So we remember that 7.22. Now we're going to delete that background model, and we're going to save this one to the background again. And now we're going to change this from 300 or 280 to 400. We can't do 400, remember, so let's go 399. Okay? Because remember, it kind of blows up when you do 400. So look at that. So we went from 280 to 400, a full 120, basically almost one third of what it was previously, and the added energy to the lower atmosphere is 0.63 watts per meter squared.
Yeah.
That's what you're meaning by a logarithmic decay. You added 100% from 0 to 280, added basically 7 watts per meter squared. But when you went from 280 to 400, it only added 0.63, which is basically less than 1/10 of what happened there. But yet you're adding a full 1/3 extra CO2, and that's what you mean by the logarithmic decay, meaning that as you add additional CO2, it adds less and less. It's kind of like the law of diminishing returns, right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So what you're saying is all this CO2 added since the industrial age added a whopping 0.63 watts per meter squared to the lower atmosphere. You're going to melt and cause catastrophic warming with 0.63 watts per meter squared. And you're saying that that doesn't mean a lot to most people, but that means a lot if you put it in context of clouds. If you're saying that a single cloud can change this astronomically.
Yeah. And luckily, since we have Modtran, we can add a cloud to the sky and
so
see what happens.
You said right here, let's just show how, and you were telling me this proves that water vapor dwarfs anything CO2 does. Let's just choose a cloud base. Okay? Whoa! Did you see that? 80 watts per meter squared is due to clouds. CO2 adds less than 1. A single cloud layer lays 80 watts per meter squared, and you're telling me we got to fear CO2?
Really?
That's a joke.
That's ridiculous.
Oh, that's utterly ridiculous. And you were telling me that you have evidence that the cloud level has been going down. Some of the middle clouds have been increasing over the recent time period, so you can see clouds have actually been going up in some areas, which would mean that you're probably warming more, and it's due to clouds, not CO2?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. That is absolutely crazy. So let's go back and take a look at Modtran again, because, wow, that's totally fascinating. 80 versus, what was that, 0.63 or something?
Yeah, 0.63.
Actually, let's go back. Okay, remember this number 80 right here, or 79.44 when you add a simple cloud layer? Let's just go back to normal, 0.63. Is that, bottom line is, CO2 is irrelevant when you include water vapor, is what you're telling me. That's absolutely fascinating. Now, you're telling me about the other thing is that you said the really important thing is that CO2 is a constant.
Yeah, so let's take a look.
So if you go over here and you take a look at CO2, now you're telling me that CO2 is a constant, both the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, and the equator, but it's also a constant from the surface all the way up to 70 kilometers at 400 parts per million now?
Yes.
And that's how you can prove it. Once again, Modtran shows you that CO2 is a constant. And you're selling it because it's a constant, it couldn't cause changes in variation between localities, meaning that if you know the weatherman keeps saying we got these heat waves here and we got these heat waves here, but you're saying that can't be caused by CO2 because CO2 is a constant. It's got to be something different, which is more than likely water vapor, because you can see water vapor going all around the world with those clouds, and those clouds represent warming.
Yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy. Okay, so once again, we know that CO2 is a constant. But then you said, okay, remember that CO2 is a constant. How then, and this gets back to your false fiber hypothesis, see, this is with altitude and temperature. So with altitude, temperatures fall. Even though you have CO2 at 400 parts per million, it falls all the way up to 16 kilometers. Then temperature increases all the way up to 50 kilometers. Then it cools again. So CO2, which is 400 parts per million all the way up, can cause cooling, warming, and cooling. That makes it a non-falsifiable hypothesis. And once again, this is pure nonsense that CO2 is causing it. Right? Now, what the other thing is you said, see how this cools in the lower 15 kilometers? Yeah. You said that if you tie that to water vapor, looky there. Look at what also decreases up to about 15 kilometers or 18 kilometers. So as the water vapor fell out of the atmosphere, the temperature cooled. Lo and behold, it says it right there in Modtran. So water vapor is highly correlated to the temperature in the lower atmosphere.
Yeah.
Oh my. So once again, you just want everybody to understand that Modtran is how you totally debunk what your teacher's telling you.
Yes.
Okay? Your teacher is totally in conflict with what a computer will tell you, and then everything you're being taught about climate science in your schools is pure and absolute nonsense.
Yes.
Yep.
And
Whew, and you can test it using Modtran?
yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Oh,
Plus,
that's
not all
absolutely
CO2 is caused by humans.
That's right. You were telling me like 95% is natural cause,
Yes,
mostly from the oceans.
95% CO2 is natural.
Well, you know the thing that you told me that I found absolutely fascinating? What you told me that I found absolutely fascinating was that CO2 lags temperature, meaning that it's the ocean that causes the CO2. And so really what we're seeing today in the atmosphere is due to the ocean 700 years ago, that CO2 lags temperature by about 700, 1,500 years.
Yeah.
And so really what you're saying is the present is causing the past to change. That doesn't make any sense at all. Because if we're saying that man is causing the CO2 to change, when we know it was caused from 800 years ago, that's like saying that the current is changing the past. That doesn't make any sense at all, because the past is what's controlling the CO2 today.
Really, we couldn't tell if we were affecting anything for another 700
years, yeah. Because there's no way for us to really say that this CO2 is produced by man and not the oceans, because that's what the oceans have been controlling it over the last millennium. Okay, so there's what we're going to say. That's going to be our next video.